Namaste everyone. Welcome to this seminar series from Indic Studies Toronto. Yeah, this is one of the various webinars we have been conducting since this summer. And today the topic is Eternal Ayodhya, and our speaker is Srimati Anuradha Goyalji. She is an avid travel blogger, and she has extensively traveled in India and abroad and visited all our ancient heritage mandirs. She also runs a YouTube channel and called IndiTales, which gives us a lot of information about our heritage, and I have managed to get all this information. Also, she has reintroduced Goa as a Vedic city and not a city of beaches only. So that is also very interesting thing about her blog. So we are looking forward to hear about her from about Ayodhya, especially the Vedic, the eternal Ayodhya or Ayodhya in history. So welcome, Anuradha ji. Please continue.
Namaste, or should we say Jai Sri Ram today? Thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation and allowing me to talk about Ayodhya. I'm going to quickly walk you through what I do and why I'm here talking about this. I run this travel blog called IndiTales, which is there in Hindi as well as English. And I run a book reviews blog, which is India's biggest book reviews blog. I curated a Yatra conference, and this year I've started a podcast which is called Detours with Anuradha Goyal in English and Idhar Udhar in Hindi. Some of the stats that we've done, and of course we have the whole ecosystem around a YouTube channel, social media channels, and we talk primarily about travel. Although we talk about travel across the world, but we focus a lot on India and a lot on ancient Indian cities and heritage. This is my earlier book, which came about 6 years ago, which is a business book. Another set of books we released, which I will talk about towards the end of the talk. And another book should be out hopefully by end of next month, and we'll talk about it then. The reason I am here is that I visited Ayodhya 3 times, and once I spent a week there to study Ayodhya. And before I spent time in Ayodhya, I have read, there are a lot of sources in our literature that talk about Ayodhya, but these are the 3 primary sources that I have used to study Ayodhya. One is Ramcharitmanas by Goswami Tulsidas ji. As we know that we have 2 main epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana. And Ramayana is based in Ayodhya. This is where it starts, this is where it ends, though the story travels from Ayodhya to Janakpur, which is in the foothills of Himalayas, for the wedding of Ram and Sita. And then it travels down to Sri Lanka for the 14-year exile period of Ram, Lakshman and Sita. And we meet the characters like Hanuman, Sugriv, Ravan, and we see all these places associated with them. But the base of the story of Ramayana is Ayodhya. So Ramcharitmanas is one big source of information on Ayodhya. The second source is in the Skand Puran. Skand Puran is one of the biggest Purans we have, but it has various khands. So in the Vaishnav Khand, there is a section called Ayodhya Mahatmya, and it talks in detail about each and every place in the Ayodhya, which it defines as a big Tirtha Sthalas. It is as big as Kashi, it's as big as Prayag or Haridwar or Pushkar or any of these places. And so it's defined in detail in the Ayodhya Mahatmya. The third source that I have is the Kalidas's Mahakavya, Raghuvansham, where he has described the lineage of the kings who have ruled from Ayodhya. So he has chosen to call it Raghuvansh, Raghu being one of the kings in that lineage, and he's named his magnum opus on Raghu. But it talks about the lineage of, it starts with Dilip, it goes to Aj, it goes to Raghu, it goes to Sri Ram, and then of course his son Lav and Kush. So there is a whole lineage that it traces, and all of them are based in Ayodhya. So these are my three literary sources that I have uh, taken a lot of information from. Then, of course, most of what I'm going to talk today comes from my personal experience of walking in the lanes of Ayodhya. In the photograph on the left, you see me walking in the streets of Ayodhya. Uh, on the right is the logo of a project called Global Encyclopedia of the Ramayana. It is a global project that has been launched by Ayodhya Shodh Sansthan, of which I'm a part, where we are going to document every possible thing associated with Ram, Ramayana or Ayodhya around the world, which includes temples, sculptures, paintings, storytelling traditions, dance dramas, music, anything and everything that is to be done will be a part of this project. This is a mega project. So a lot of my experiences come from having traveled to Ayodhya, having spent a lot of time in the streets of Ayodhya, and from being a part of this project. Now, with that background in place, if I can ask some of you, if you can tell me in the chat window, what do you know about Ayodhya? If you can tell me in chat window, what do you know about Ayodhya, apart from the fact that this is the birthplace of Sri Ram and this is the place where he ruled from. So very ancient, yes. It's also a Buddhist site, yes. It's the capital of Kaushal Pradesh, yes. All right. On the banks of river Saryu. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so I'll move on to define what is Ayodhya Puri. So the word Ayodhya comes from the combination of three letters, which is in Hindi we would call it Akar, Yakar, Dhakar. And these three letters stand from Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. So Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So this city belongs to all three of them. That is how the word Ayodhya is formed, but it also means the place that has never been won over, Ayodhya, the one which has never been won over. There are a lot of names that are mentioned in our Puranas for Ayodhya. Some of them are Saket. Saket is typically something that we associate with the Buddhist time. But we really don't know if it is the same Ayodhya or Saket was located close to Ayodhya. But Chinese travelers like Huan Sang have mentioned Saket, and they have mentioned a lot of Buddhist stupas here. Then it's called Vishnu Priya. The reason is obvious, because it is dear to Vishnu. This is where he chose to take one of his avatars, one of his key avatars as Sri Ram. So it is a place which is dear to Vishnu. It's also called Adipuri. Adipuri means the first city. So now you could say the first city is Kashi or Ayodhya, we don't know. But they say it's the first city of Vishnu. It's the first city which was ever set up. So it is also called Adipuri. It's called Kaushala because, like you said, it was the capital of the Kaushala Janpad. So in India, we had 16 Mahajanpads, or the 16 main divisions of the land, of which Kaushal was one of them, and it was the capital of Kaushal. It's called Kaushala Puri. Puri essentially means a city. So Kaushala Puri, because Sri Ram lived here, it's called Rampuri as well. It's called Padmapuri as well, because Padma is again one of the symbols of Vishnu. It's called Punya Lakshana. Punya Lakshana means one with auspicious signs, and we'll see some of them as we go ahead. It's also called Nandini because of the association of a story of the Nandini cow. This city is in the shape of a fish. So it's also called Matsyakar. So because of the fish shape. So the bulge of fish that you see is around the Saryu river, and the wings are Guptar Ghat and another Tirtha. And so this is defined as a Matsya Akar city, which means the city in the shape of a fish. And incidentally, fish was also, or twin fishes were also the royal symbol of the solar dynasty. And we still, when you visit Ayodhya, you will see it engraved almost everywhere. And it continues to be the symbol of the Uttar Pradesh government. Okay, so it is also defined in the shape of a dhanush, or a bow. So if you take the half of the fish, it also becomes a dhanu shape. In fact, city of Delhi and city of Ayodhya both are defined in the shape of bow as well. But in the Skand Puran, it is defined in the shape of a fish. So Ayodhya Pati. So any city is usually known by, most ancient cities are usually known by the kings who have ruled them, or the way they have ruled the kings, or the big projects they have done, or the big conquests they have done, or the big things they have done. So Ayodhya Pati, let's look at some of the kings of Ayodhya. So tell me, what are the other kings of Ayodhya you know, apart from these kings? We know these, we know Ram, Lakshman, Bharat, Shatrughan, and their father Dashrath, and his son Lav and Kush. Ikshvaku, Dilipa, Harishchandra, right? Bhagirath, yes. These are some of the kings. So Ikshvaku would be the first king of Ayodhya. The story goes that when the humanity was created, Manu and Satrupa, they performed a lot of tapasya in Naimisharanya, which is not far from Ayodhya, which is about 90 to 100 kilometers from Ayodhya, and they performed intense tapasya, and then they gave birth to sons, and one of their sons was Ikshvaku, and from Ikshvaku started the solar dynasty. So Ikshvaku, that's why it's also called Ikshvaku Vansh. But the most popular king of the solar dynasty, apart from Sri Ram, would be Raghu. That's why it gets the name Raghukul. Sri Ram is also called Raghukul Nayak or Raghav, or a lot of idioms, like lot of dohas like Raghukul Reet Sada Chali Ai Pran Jai Par Vachan Na Jai. Lot of them trace their roots to the time of Raghu. So Raghu would be great grandfather of Sri Ram. Ram's father is Dashrath, Dashrath's father is Aj, Aj's father is Dilip, and Dilip's father is Raghu. Let me tell you about one such place which is described in detail in the Skand Puran. Now, Skand Puran says, Raghukul Bhushan, right? So one of the Tirth places mentioned in Ayodhya is a place called Swarnakhani. Now, Swarnakhani is a place. Swarnakhani literally means the gold mine. The place, it is said that this is a place where Kuber did the rain of gold. Swarna ki varsha hui thi. So there was a rain of gold that happened here because of Raghu. And the story goes like this, that Raghu went on a Digvijay Yatra. So he won over the whole of earth. He came back victorious to Ayodhya after winning the whole of earth. So he was the Mahipati, the king of the whole earth. He came back and he wanted to do a yagna to celebrate his win, and also to hand over whatever he has earned to all the rishis. So he called all the rishis who were stationed in all different Tirtha Sthalas across India. He called all of them to Ayodhya. He performed an elaborate yagna, and he gave away everything that he had earned from all over the earth to them, to the extent that he was just left with his personal belongings, bare minimum personal belongings. Now, it so happened that one of the Munis, Kotsa Muni, walked in to Ayodhya just as he had finished giving away everything he had. Now, Kotsa Muni came and Raghu, when he was welcoming him, he had a pot of clay in his hand when he washed the feet of Kotsmuni. Now, looking at the clay pot, Kotsmuni understood that he has given away everything and he will not get anything from Raghu. And he had come with an intention to ask him 14 crore gold coins. That's what he needed. And he thought Raghu is the only king who can afford to give me this. And when he saw that Raghu is holding a clay pot instead of a gold pot, he lost his hope. But he very politely said, I will go to another king and ask for it. Raghu said, wait, give me a day and I will try to arrange your gold coins. He thought for a few minutes and then he said, okay, I'm going to attack Kuber and then get the required money for him. So when he started walking towards Kuber's kingdom, Kuber was so scared of him that he made the gold rain in his kingdom in Ayodhya. And that's how that place came to be known as Swarnakhani. Now, the interesting part is that the gold that the Kuber gave was far more than the gold needed by Kotsmuni. So Raghu tells Kotsmuni that please take all of this because I have earned this only for you. Kotsmuni says, no, my requirement is 14 crores, which I have to give to my Guru Vishwamitra, and I will leave the rest to you. And Raghu takes all that and distributes it in all the other sages who were present there. So Raghu is known as one of the biggest donors. So if he needed, he could attack or he could wage war on somebody like Kuber, but when he had everything, he would give it away. We of course know the story of Harish Chandra. He's always quoted as Danveer Harish Chandra, or somebody who is very, very generous with donations. We always call him Harish Chandra. So we all know that, but not many people know that he was also the king of Ayodhya, though when he had to sell himself or when he had to sell his wife and his child, he went to Kashi, he went to Banaras and he sold himself. Which also tells us that probably Banaras was a center of trade more than an Ayodhya was. Ayodhya was probably like a political capital. So Raja Dilip, who was Aja's father, he is known for his Gau Puja, for his cow worship. He was somebody, he and his wife, I think Sunaina was her name, they did not have a child, and when they wanted to have a child, they went and lived in an ashram, in a Vasishtha Muni's ashram, and they did the Gau Seva for a long time before they were blessed with a child. But they did not ask the cows to come to their palace so that they can fulfill a ritual. They decided to go and serve the cows where they were. Similarly, Aj is known for his Digvijay, for winning over all the earth. Bhagirath, we all know that he's responsible for getting Ganga on earth. A lot of people also interpret as somebody who excavated Ganga and he created the river Ganga, which again led to the creation of this whole plains of the flood these plains which were fed by Ganga. We know Mandhata as again one of the illustrious king. Kakuts is another very interesting king who has happened in this dynasty. He was probably the grandson of Ikshvaku. Now his name was something else. I think Puranjay was his name, and he as it happens that there was a war between the Asuras and the Devas, and Devatas lost the war, and then they came to Ayodhya and Asik, and they sought help from the kings of Ayodhya. And at that time, Kakus said, I will come, and Puranjay said, I will come and help you out, but Indra will have to become my vehicle. And Indra took the form of a bull on which Puranjay sit and won the war for them. And so he got the name Kakuts, which means sitting on a hump. Another interesting king who happened was Raja Ghosh. He is somebody who's known for sun worship. Even today, there is a pond named after him. It's called Ghoshark Kund, and he was known for the sun worship that he did. So, to the Tirtha Sthalas in Ayodhya. Tirtha Sthalas. So, the biggest Tirtha Sthal in Ayodhya is Saryu. All these pictures have been taken by me during my travels. So Saryu is a river which comes from Lake Mansarovar. I mean, if you've heard of Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, the same Lake Mansarovar is the origin of Saryu River. It comes via the Kumaon Hills in Uttarakhand. It comes down, and after Ayodhya, after a while, it actually merges with Ganga. So it becomes Ganga after Ayodhya, I think 60, 70 miles or something, it becomes Ganga. It is also a place where it takes a slight northward turn. That is where Ayodhya is located. Skand Puran gives a very, very clear definition of where Ayodhya is. I remember recently there was talks about where is Ayodhya. Some people claim it to be in Thailand, some people claim it to be somewhere else. Somebody recently claimed it to be in Nepal. But it is very, very clearly mentioned in Skand Puran that Ayodhya is located on the banks of river Saryu, 1 yojan east of Swargdar, 1 yojan west of it, till the point where it merges with another river called Tilodaki. So the Sangam of Tilodaki and Saryu at one end, and Sangam of or confluence of Saryu and Gharghara at another end. So by these rivers, this boundary of Ayodhya is very, very clearly defined. The southern bank is Saryu, and north of Saryu is the Ayodhya, and its dimensions are very, very clearly defined. These are some of the ghats. The picture you see on the top is the Saryu Aarti that probably has been started recently, but all the 3 times I have been there, I've seen this Aarti. I've in fact performed this Aarti. It is pretty much done on the lines of Ganga Aarti in Banaras, and it's beautiful. On the right you see is Ram Ki Paidi. It's a very popular place for taking bath. It's a small video of Ayodhya. It's a video of Saryu River from Guptar Ghat till Ayodhya. So just a 2-minute video. So you see a lot of sandbanks in between the river. It's a fairly vast river. I'll tell you the story of Guptar Ghat after we finish this. So there's a lot of shraddh that is done. So you can see a lot of these post-life rituals are being done here. That's how the city of Ayodhya looks from Saryu. That's a huge bridge that crosses. That's Ayodhya skyline as of now. It has very colorful streets, you know, houses are very colorful. This is Ayodhya Shodh Sansthan, which has complete documentation of everything to do with Ram and Ramayana. That's a Saryu Archi for you. So this is Guptar Ghat, from where we started the boat journey. Guptar Ghat is the place from where Sri Ram left earth, or left Ayodhya, when his work was done on earth. So it is said that when he left, when he decided to leave his body, or when he decided to go back to Swarg, he was having a conversation with Kal, which is the god of time. He came down to Ayodhya, and he and Sri Ram were in a conversation about his time of departure. And Sri Ram had given clear instructions to Lakshman that nobody should enter the room where discussions were taking place. But as it always happens, Rishi Durvasa walked in and he said, "I have to see Ram now." And Lakshman had to allow him to go in. Now, Sri Ram satisfied Rishi Durvasa, but he gave up Lakshman. He punished Lakshman by saying, "मैं तुम्हारा त्याग करता हूँ, I give you up." And Lakshman there and then decided to leave his body. So where he left, Lakshman, as we know, is the avatar of Sheshnag. So the place where he took bath in Saryu, and where he left his body, or where the Sheshnag appeared to take him back, or to take him back into their world, is called Sahastradhara, because it is said Sahastra means thousands, and thousands of the hoods of the Nagas came out to take Lakshman. That is one of the most important Tirtha Sthalas of Ayodhya, Sahastradhara. After Lakshman left, when Sri Ram decided to leave, he started walking towards the Saryu. This is the place where he came, and this is the place where he was accompanied by everybody in Ayodhya, be it a human being, every living being, it is said, in Ayodhya accompanied him, and they entered Saryu with him. And because they entered Saryu with him, they also reached Swarga with him. So this place is important from that perspective, and it is slightly away from the city. So this place is called Gopratar Tirth. The distorted name is Guptar Ghat. Sahastradhara is an important Tirth Sthala. Swargdwar is another Tirth Sthala which is important. Swarnkhani, I've already told you the story of the gold mine that Raghu and Kuber's story. Then there are a lot of kunds. Now, when I studied Skand Puran for the first time, and I was making a list of places to see, I had a list of about 55 ponds. And imagine, this is a city which is located on the banks of a perennial river, which is always flowing. And right next to it, there is a list of 55 ponds of different kinds, and each pond has a story. So if there is a pond called Brihaspati Kund, so there is a story associated with Brihaspati, the guru of Devtas, and it is also associated with astrologically, if your Brihaspati is weak, then you're supposed to go and have a bath there. There is a story associated with Rukmini saying that when she had visited here, she excavated this kund, and it has become famous with her name. Similarly, Brahma came here and excavated a kund. Sita herself excavated, a kund was made for Sita. There is a kund for Rati and Kamadev, where, couples are supposed to have bath together, and then they become like Rati and Kamadev. There is a Yogini Kund where the followers of the Yogini Vidyas, or Mahavidyas, they take bath. I've listed some of them. There is a long list of ponds that Ayodhya has, and each pond has a story. associated, a Puranic story associated with the person on whose name the pond is. There is a tithi associated, a date associated on which there is an annual pilgrimage date of to visit and take bath there. Taking bath remains the biggest ritual that you can do on the Tirth Yatra. But doing charity, giving dan, performing certain pujas at places, it's recommended that you stay awake the whole night, which is called jagran, which means you stay awake and keep worshipping through the night. So there are a lot of rituals associated with each of them that are mentioned in Skand Puran. Now let me walk you through some of the temples of Ayodhya, important temples. The most important temple is, of course, Ram Janmabhoomi temple, and the picture on the right is the Ram Lala's picture that was circulated on the day of the Bhumi Pujan. And on the left is the murti of Sri Ram, Sita, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrughan, which is in a temple called Kale Ram temple right now, but it was probably a part of the old Ram Janmabhoomi temple. Then the second most important temple and the most popular famous temple is Hanuman Gadhi temple, which is located on a hilltop, and which is where on the Bhumi Pujan day the Prime Minister also had visited. Now this is an ancient temple. It is said that when Sri Ram was leaving the earth, he told Hanuman to take care of Ayodhya, and he's still standing there and taking care of Ayodhya. It's a belief. It's on a hilltop, and you will see a lot of monkeys on these temples, and you get a beautiful view of Ayodhya because it's on a height. When you are and you can go on the roof of this temple. When you stand on the roof of this temple, you get a beautiful view of this temple. It's a Hanuman temple, and you get to see a lot of monkeys and a lot of kirtan. This is a temple called Kanak Bhavan temple. This is not really a temple, it's a bhavan. Bhavan means a palace or a place of residence. Now, it is said that this was the palace of Sita. And this was the palace that Kaikai gifted Sita when she got married in Muh Dikhai. It's a ritual when the bride comes in and the mother-in-law gives her something when she sees the bride for the first time. So when Kaikai first saw Sita, she gave her this palace, and Kanak Bhavan literally means golden palace. This is one of the most alive temples in Ayodhya as of now. There's the murti of Ram Sita look like this. The interesting part in this temple is that there is a plaque which lists the renovations of this temple right from Treta Yuga till today. So we know that, of course, the structure that we see today cannot be more than 500 years old or 600 years old. But there is a mention of all the renovations that have taken place, or the people who have contributed to the renovations since this temple has existed. So I find that very interesting about this temple. And also this temple has something called Kanak Rasoi, because it is Sita's palace. There is Sita Rasoi where you can eat food. There is a small restaurant-like place where you can get the temple food as prasad and eat. The temple on the left is called Badasthan. It is supposed to be the darbar of Dashrath. So this is supposed to be the place where Dashrath used to have his darbar, his court. On the right is a temple called Nageshwar Nath. It's a Shiva temple. They don't allow you to take the picture of the deity. So I've taken the picture of the carvings, and it's one of the most beautifully carved temples in Ayodhya. This is the temple. This is the royal temple, current royal temple in the current royal premises of Ayodhya. So what you see on the right is the temple as it looks from outside, and what you see on the left is the temple interior. It's a Shiva temple. It's called Darshaneshwar Mahadev temple. And what intrigues me is the beautiful paintings, very colorful, very strong paintings all around the temple. temples of Ayodhya have a very interesting tradition. They sing the Ram Dhun continuously. They sing it continuously 24/7 non-stop. And not one temple, not two temples, many temples do that. So I would say take 1 minute and look at these. This is how anybody can join. This is just streets of Ayodhya. You can be walking and listening to music. This is the works Karyashala. So this is a unique tradition that I have found only in Ayodhya. I don't recall seeing it anywhere, and in Ayodhya I saw it in so many temples, some of which I could record. The temple on the left is Badi Dev Kali temple. She's the Kul Devi of Sri Ram and the Suryavansha. And there are two Dev Kali temples. One is called Badi Dev Kali and one is called Choti Dev Kali. It is believed that the Choti Dev Kali is the Kul Devi of Sita Mata, and she brought her along with her when she came to Ayodhya. The temple on the right is actually Chhauni. So Chhaunis are how ashrams are called in Ayodhya. So most of the big ashrams are called Chhaunis. The temple on the left, it's the wall of the temple. It's the Valmiki temple, and the whole of Valmiki Ramayana is engraved on the walls. All the 24,000 shlokas are written on the walls of this temple, and it's probably one of the biggest temples as of now in Ayodhya. Temple on the right is it's the same temple. On top of it, you have something called a Sita Ram Naam Bank, where they give you, anybody who goes there is given a booklet on which you can do the Lekhan Jap, which is writing the name of Sri Ram, and then you are supposed to deposit it back to them, and then they dispose them off ritually. This is a painting that depicts the Milan of Hanuman and Bharat. Now we know that when Sri Ram was away for 14 years, Ayodhya was taken care of by Bharat. But Bharat did not stay in the city of Ayodhya. He stayed outside the city limits in a place called Nandigram, and where he made a small kuti for himself, or a small hut for himself, and he lived in that hut, and he let the khadaun, or the footwear of Sri Ram, to rule. And while he was living there, he met Hanuman twice. Once when Hanuman was going to fetch the Sanjeevani booty, and second time when Hanuman came as a messenger to tell Bharat that Sri Ram is on his way back to Ayodhya. And both the times, the Hanuman Bharat Milap is very fondly remembered in the temples at Nandigram. On the left is the Raj Mahal of Ayodhya, and on the right I've shown one of the ponds. Like I said, there are 50 plus ponds in Ayodhya. This is one of the ponds. On the left is some of the Kaushalya and Sri Ram, and some of the style of making murtis in Ayodhya. On the right, what you see is a marker stone. And these are some of the marker stones. And whole of Ayodhya, there are these marker stones which will tell you about the place, the month and the time when the annual pilgrimage takes place, and the name of the place. And you'll find 100 plus of such markers. These were probably put in place by the British. There is a tradition of writing Sita Ram, Ram Ram everywhere. So when a Bilva Patra is offered to Shivji in any of the Shiva temples, it is also offered after Ram Ram or Sita Ram is written on it. These are some of the unique things I found in Ayodhya. On the right, you see the dhobi. They still wash clothes in the ponds or like this. And when I saw dhobi, it reminds you of an episode from Ramayana. Ayodhya is a place where a lot of karma kand is done, where a lot of shraddh are done, a lot of pitri rituals are done, and you'll often see people coming there to do a lot of rituals for their ancestors. On the right, what you see is a gharonda. If you've heard Hindi songs and if you've heard the word gharonde banana, then this is how the gharonda looks like. It's made around Diwali time by children mostly. I'll skip this in the interest of time. This is Tulsidas. We know that Tulsidas ji wrote Ramayana. So the Ayodhya Shod Sansthan is located in a place called Tulsi Samarak Bhavan, and it has a beautiful collection of art forms from around the world that depict Ramayana or Ram in any form. The walls are, as you enter the place, the walls are painted with the whole Ramayana story, and interestingly, it is painted in a way that it depicts the painting style of the place. So if it's the Ram Janki wedding that is depicted, it is depicted in Mithila style. If it is the jungles of Dandakaranya, it is painted in that style. So that's very interesting, and it of course has a whole lot of literature that they have published on Ramayana, a lot of research work. I'll briefly touch upon this. The temple on the left is Rishabh Devji of the first Jain Tirthankar, or Adinath as he is called. Now, he and 22 other Jain Tirthankars also trace their lineage to the same Suryavansha as Sri Ram, and 5 of them were born in Ayodhya. Although I saw only one temple dedicated to Adinathji, but it's a huge temple. Buddhism also flourished. Again, Sakyamuni Buddha or Gautam Buddha also traces his lineage to the same Suryavansha. There are only mounds that are left now. One of them is Mani Parvat, which you can see and which you can go on top of. But there are not too many remains of Buddhist era left. Maybe there are excavated items which I am yet to see. These are, there is a long documentation of the journey of Sri Ram from Ayodhya to Sri Lanka and back. His khadang are still worshipped. Lot of ashrams in Ayodhya, and you will still see yagnas being done. I'll skip this story in the interest of time. I'm done with my time. I'll just take you through some cuisines of Ayodhya. So the thali you see is what you get at the Kanak Bhavan. I told you you can get the prasad as a thali and eat it. And so this is how the thali looks like. Very simple food made without onion, garlic, anything. Very simple, very homely, very neat, clean, blessed food. What you see on right is something that's called dana. If you've been to Purvanchal or Eastern UP, Bihar, this is the most healthiest, most easy to get basic snack that you can get. It's just roasted grains with your choicest chutney customized to your taste. You'll find it anywhere. Litti chokha, those of you know, and then chai in these kulhars, the clay cups. This is a typical food that you get in the streets of Ayodhya. Let me end this with something sweet. So in Ayodhya, they eat jalebi with dahi. So dahi jalebi is something that you must have as and when you go to Ayodhya. On the right, what you see is the laddus being made for Hanuman Gadi temple. These are the yellow laddus that are offered to Hanuman and offered to a lot of monkeys who continue to live there. And that's with that, I will end it. And these are the books that Samir ji spoke about, Unusual Temples of India or Bharat Ke Anokhe Mandir. They are available online, and please do read them and share your feedback. It helps us bring you more books to you. These are my contact details. And now I will open it up to questions.
Thank you, Anuradha ji. That was a wonderful journey we went through, and we wish it would never end. You could keep on talking, but because of the time limitations, we will probably have it again. Uh,
I wanted to, maybe if you could talk a little bit about, I heard this called Ayodhya Parikrama. Is it like a
Yes.
walk that you take around?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, yes. So I wanted to speak about it. So there are 5 different types of parikramas or circumambulations that you can do in Ayodhya. 2 are one is the smallest one is Antargrihi, which essentially goes around the Ram Janmabhoomi temple. Another one is Ramkot, which is also around the same area, which is the inner circles of the city. All of them, at least till I went there, were not doable because the area was cordoned off. Hopefully after the Ram Mandir comes up, we'll be able to do. Next is a Panchkosi Yatra, which will typically be about 15 to 16 kilometers, which is what a lot of people do even today by walking around. Then there is a slightly bigger one, which is called Chauda Kosi, which is 14 kos, so 14 into 3, about 42, 45 kilometers, which is again something a lot of people do during Kartik. Now, Kartik Snan is a big thing in Ayodhya, so Kartik Ekadashi to Kartik Purnima is a big mela that happens, and during those times, whoever wants to do Panchkoshi, they do Panchkoshi, and whoever wants to do Chauda Kosi, they do Chauda Kosi. I have done both of them, and so they cover. They start from Saryu and they end at Saryu. Then there is a much bigger one, which is Chaurasi Kos, which will cover a much larger area of Kshetra, Ayodhya as a Kshetra, which I have not done, but I intend doing sometime. I don't know when. So these are the 5 ones. The most popular are Panchkosi and Chauda Kosi, which is done very, very regularly by people. And if you go generally walking around on those roads, you will see some people walking.
Namaste, Anuradha ji.
Namaste.
And, I am Agrani from Bangalore.
Ji.
And first of all, let me congratulate that your session was really wonderful, and you have covered a lot of details about Ayodhya and the temples in Ayodhya. Really, really wonderful. And I have one small doubt. You had mentioned about Ayodhya representing Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. So can you please tell me the reference of this particular place?
This is from Skand Puran, Ayodhya Mahatmya.
Okay. Can you help me with the shloka, because it will help me, because I'm also doing a lot of research on Ayodhya and the temples visited by Lord Rama.
I will have to. It's in the first chapter of the Ayodhya Mahatmya. Exact verse, if you can ping me somewhere or write an email to me, I'll share the exact verse. I'll have to check. But it's definitely in the first chapter of Ayodhya Mahatmya, where the description of Ayodhya comes, where this whole Matsya Akar comes, the dimensions come, the location comes. That's where it comes. So I can share the exact verse number if you leave me a message.
Sure, I'll send a message for you. That will help me. That will help me a lot. Thank you so much. Once again, congratulations for doing this wonderful virtual tour of Ayodhya.
Thank you, sir.
Jai Sri Ram.
Jai Sri Ram.
So the new Ram Janmabhoomi temple that's coming up, where's the location? Is it right on the riverbank, or I'm not familiar with the topography?
No, so it's little inside. It will be 2-3 kilometers inside. It is coming up at exactly I assume it's coming up at exactly the same place as the Janmabhoomi that I have seen 3 times. It's there, but it's away from the river. It's a couple of kilometers away from the river. It's not on the river.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. It was very informative, and the pictures are very, very interesting and helpful. I was wondering, in Ayodhya, who are the most influential kind of gurus or sampradayas in that region? Who are the most influential kind of guys around?
It is Nritya Gopal Dasji. He's been instrumental in the Ram Janmabhoomi thing also, and he's the head of the Ram Janmabhoomi Trust as well. So he's definitely the most influential. And Ayodhya Naresh, the royal family of Ayodhya, is they still live in the place, so they are also influential. And there are a lot of ashrams, chhaunis that they are called. But Ayodhya is a place, if you really look at the characters of the kings who have ruled from there, Ayodhya is a place where people give up very easily. People don't really hold back things. So I really didn't meet any any very egoistic people in Ayodhya who would who would throw their weight around. Any sampradaya associated with Sri Ram would have a presence in Ayodhya, but I have not really studied the sampradayas, I'll be very honest.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Narayan Vyasji has a question. His question is, how old would these temples be? And it seems that all the temples are dedicated to Sri Ram. How about the Suryavansha kings before him?
Okay, so the last prominent king of the Solar dynasty that we know of died in the war of Mahabharata. He was killed by Abhimanyu. After that, Ayodhya kind of lost its power. It ceased to be a power center. It continued to be a city, but it was not the capital city. It came under various kings, so it went into kind of an oblivion, or it was not as prominent. Then, about 2000 years ago, Vikramaditya visited Ayodhya, and then he built about, it is said he built about 360 temples in the whole of Ayodhya. And then that's how the Ayodhya kind of reawakening of Ayodhya happened. And then it came under various kings or kingdoms, whoever ruled in that area. The temples dedicated to other kings are not there, but the Tirtha Sthalas are there. Another thing that I did not cover is the Vishnu connection. There are 7 ancient Vishnu murtis which are supposed to be there in Ayodhya. I think there are only 2 of them right now. But there's a documentation of 7 ancient Vishnu murtis which associate the city with Vishnu. And they are called Saptahari together, and they all have 7 different names and 7 different stories. I've seen only one of them in a temple close to Guptar Ghat, and it's in a very, very simplistic state as possible. I don't know if it is really taken care of by anybody, so the antiquity is there. The stories associated with the rest of the kings are there. In fact, I was looking for a sun temple there, and I found only one on the outskirts of the city. I didn't find one in the city, but it's possible I missed it. It's very possible. But there are stories with Tirtha Sthalas that connect them to different kings. There are not temples.
Namaste, Anuradha ji.
Namaste.
Doing this for us. How long do you think one should spend in Ayodhya so that they can get a good 360-degree view? And
so most people these days do. I mean, I'm talking as of today. Tomorrow, when Ram Janmabhoomi comes, things will change entirely. Today, most people do it as a day trip from Lucknow. So they go in the morning. It's about 1.5 to 2 hours away. They go in the morning and come back in the evening. But I would say stay there, and if you can do at least one of these Panchakoshi or Chaudah Kosi Yatra, then you would have seen quite a bit of it.
Okay. And my second question is, Ramayana being one of the epics,
right,
heritage of our culture, do you think we had to go through another epic through the courts and all this hoopla to get cleared? Because we have so much history, right?
Right. So, I mean, this is, I would say this is I see this as a power of literature, you know, it's the power of literature that has kept Ayodhya alive. Otherwise, honestly, when you walked 4 or 5 years back, when I walked in the streets of Ayodhya, there was nothing that distinguishes it from any other city in that part of the world. But it's the power of literature that has kept Ayodhya alive.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about Naimisharanya?
Naimisharanya is, I can do a complete talk on that. I've spent a couple of days studying it, and it's one of the most important places that not many people know it. So Naimisharanya, if you pick up any Puran and read, it's it's the venue for that conversation between the different rishis is always Naimisharanya. It's a forest. Naimisharanya means it's a forest. It's located on the banks of river Gomati. It is supposed to be a forest, but now, of course, there are a lot of temples that have come up. There is Chakratirth, and around that there are. I have a full post on Naimisharanya. You can read it if you go on my blog IndiTales. You'll find a complete post on Naimisharanya on the stories and everything. But what is important in Naimisharanya is that they say there are each yug has one Tirtha Sthal. So Naimisharanya belongs to the Satyug. Or the Krit Yug, as they call it. Pushkar belongs to Treta Yug. Kurukshetra belongs to Dwapar Yug. And in the present Yug, Kali Yug, it is Ganga, which is the Tirth. So from that perspective, Naimisharanya becomes important.
Okay, Dhanyavad.
Where is it physically? Is it in Ayodhya or is it outside?
No. It's away from Ayodhya. It's about 90 kilometers from Lucknow, a little more from Ayodhya. So it's in a different direction. Not too far, but little far. If you're planning to do it with Ayodhya, then you do Ayodhya, come back to Lucknow, and from Lucknow you can do a day trip to Naimisharanya.
I guess after the Ram Mandir is ready, there is going to be a lot of visitors to Ayodhya.
I hope so. I mean, people need to go there. We need to go there. And it's the visit of the devotees that keeps a Tirtha Sthal alive. Ultimately, it's the devotees' devotion that keeps the place alive.
Namaste, Anuradhaji. Thank you for your very informative session. The question I had was again with the historicity and antiquity, and say with respect to the present generation, what is it that, like, I mean, when people worship, worship is like, you worship a god, and we have a tradition of worshiping the Raja, who's like, like considered like godlike, and especially with respect to Ram, who was like a godlike human being, but whom we considered an avatar, and hence we worshipped him. But in today's context, how is it like? How will you try to say relate the divinity of the person and the historical part of it? So, where we can, like say for today's generation, where we can convince them that it was real, but the worship is more like because because of the deeds of the person. So what are how do you want to explain it to say the present generation that Rama was a historical person, but the worship that happens is because of his deeds, or the way we consider him as an avatar?
Okay.
Thank you.
So, I just, last week I did a talk on the temples, on different types of temples that we have. And in that, I covered a category of temples which I said are ancestor temples, people who were our ancestors. Now, we of course have a tradition of worshipping all our ancestors. We just had Pitri Paksh where we worship all our ancestors. But there are certain illustrious ancestors that we had who did something out of the ordinary, who did something extraordinary, something almost divine, or something godlike, or something so miraculous that we raise them to the level of a divine. Now, Sri Ram, we of course consider him to be the avatar of Vishnu, but there are a lot of human beings. Tomorrow, another 100, 200 years down the line, Mahatma Gandhi is going to be that, or he's already that. We worship him. Or Guru Nanak Dev, we know that he lived. We know a lot of people 500, 700 years ago who lived, who are now treated as God. And as the time passes by, the power of divinity increases. In my belief, it is because we worship, we add the power to that. So if you look at it from that perspective, it is not too difficult to believe that we can worship somebody who lived on earth just like us. And it also comes from the fact that we all come from the same source, and we all go back and merge with the same source. which means that we all carry the divinity within us, but have we invoked that divinity? The invocation of that divinity happens to a different level in each of us. I mean, we can't be as divine, or we are not yet as divine as a Sri Ram or a Sri Krishna. That's my interpretation. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, yeah, it does in a way. Yes, thank you. Before you go, I have one more question about in your travels to Ayodhya.
Mm-hmm.
What was their context of the historical timeline with respect to, say, today's age? In a sense, how long was it?
When you say
in
there,
relation,
that is who are you talking about?
I'm talking about people in Ayodhya, like for example, who live there, or say some of the people who
Okay.
historians in Ayodhya, or the local people, or the institutions or the temples. Do they have any sense of the timeline in terms of today's time? Sense like say 3,000, 5,000 years ago, or something of that sort.
So the people at the temple and people in the people who write history textbooks or scholarly works are two different worlds. People in the scholarly world are obsessed with timelines, spaces, who built what, the data part of it. People who are in the temples or who are there, for them it doesn't matter. All they say is पुराना है, बहुत पुराना है, बाप दादा के जमाने का है. If say बाप दादा only means 100 years, 80 years, 100 years, but they are not bothered. In fact, in my upcoming book, I have spoken about it, that how these things really do not matter to a devotee. Even if you ask, I mean, I've had a case where I think in one of the Odisha temples, I don't read Odia, so I asked somebody to read the data written out over there for me, and he was like, why do you want to know this? You come here to worship, go worship, take blessings, say your prayers and go back. How does it matter who built it and when was it built? It was like, how does it matter? So these are two entirely different worlds. They rarely meet. I'll be very surprised if they meet at some place. The people in Ayodhya also, people who are researching as independent entity, and people who are worshipping as devotees. To them, he lived. That is important. Whether it was 500 years ago or 5,000 years ago, it doesn't really matter.
We in the current day think that Lord Rama was just a hero or an idealistic person who actually had certain principles in life and certain ideals. What we forget to teach our generations or the people in general, or what we forget to learn from the Valmiki Ramayana itself, is that Lord Rama is the supreme Lord, or he is the supreme Lord who actually descended to this planet Earth with various missions like killing Ravana and then killing the Rakshasas of Dandakaranya forest, and show how the ideal king has to be, and so many other things. So with this, over a period of time from generations to generations, this particular knowledge is actually a kind of dissolved, wherein now Rama for everybody is like a kind of an ideal person. So many of them I've seen, they say, okay, leadership lessons from Ramayana, or personality lessons from Rama. So all these things are actually very, very superficial. What we actually should teach our children and should teach our generation is that Lord Rama was the supreme Lord. Now, there are enough proofs in Valmiki Ramayana and various other versions of Ramayana to substantiate this particular point. And this is how we have to take it. And we all worship Lord Rama, not because, of course, his qualities, not just because of those superficial ideals which we all talk about, but because of the innumerable qualities. Because in various Puranas, like Matsya Purana, there is a shloka which says, Charitram Raghunathasya Shatakoti Pravitsaram Ekaikamaksharam Pumsa Mahapataka Nashanam. That means the charitra of Raghunatha is spread across 100 crore verses. And just by understanding one word, it is Mahapataka Nashaka. That means just by understanding one word of those 100 crore verses, it will take away all the sinful reactions. So this is the perspective I would like to bring in or add into your answer, Anuradha ji. And just another minute I'll take with respect to the timeline. And when you mentioned that for devotees, it does not matter whether Rama, the timeline. Actually, I'm a devotee of Lord Rama, and I have been practicing this from my childhood, and I'm from Vrindavan. And I have been reading all these Ramayanas, various versions. And yes, as a devotee, for me, it is very important to understand the data in the temple or understand the history of the temple, because that particular temple reminds me of the Leela of the Lord. And when we hear about the Leela of the Lord pertaining to a particular temple, it actually gets us connected to our roots and it purifies us. So hearing about the Lord is actually purifying us. So the
Okay, Agrani ji, we will continue this session later on and we will talk about this. I think we have run out of time and
sure,
probably
Sameer,
we'll
sure.
have
Thank
a
you so
session
much.
some
Thank
other
you for
time.
the
Thanks
time.
very much.
Yeah, I'll just add, my perspective to it. I would say for the next generation, make sure they read the original Ramayana and then let them make their own inferences. It is such a complex, such a simple yet complex and such a nuanced text that every time you read, you pick up something else. What you pick up at 10, you will not pick up at 40 or 60. So just let them read and let them make their own inferences, let them pick up their own favorites out of it, give them that independence. I mean, my view is this, because when I read it, I picked up Ram Rajya was very important to me. I actually gave a 1-hour talk on what is Ram Rajya and what does it mean for it today. For me, that's the most relevant part of Ramayana today. But everyone will pick up a different thing. But what is important is let's all read it. Let's all read the original Ramayana. With
Thank
that,
you,
I will
Narendra.
end.
That was a very enlightening talk you had, and I wish we could go on forever, but it's very late for you also and for some viewers. And we look forward to hearing from you again. Dhanyavad.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sameerji, and the whole team of Indic Studies at Toronto for organizing this. Dhanyavad. Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.